Growing up in Kansas City and Arizona, Dylan Nation had what many would call a privileged childhood, until experimenting with drugs spiraled into years of addiction. In this conversation, he opens up about the slow progression from marijuana and alcohol to Xanax and heroin, the moment a meeting and treatment gave him hope, and why confronting discomfort became the backbone of his recovery. Now, a counselor with 11 years in the field, Dylan shares clear, practical insights regarding the pink cloud, building real discipline, and how choosing healthy problems can transform a life. If you or someone you know is navigating addiction or any of life's struggles, this one offers both candor and hard-won wisdom. So Dylan, how about you just give us a quick introduction, who you are, where you're raised, and just a little bit about yourself personally.
So I was born in Kansas City, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
1990. I was blessed to have gotten into recovery pretty young. Both parents were around. I grew up pretty much a perfect childhood. I mean, I don't think there is a perfect childhood, but we never really worried about anything. I have an older sister and another older sister who's a half sister, and my dad was a criminal defense attorney in Kansas City. He was like a prominent defense attorney. Like, I remember being young and having news cameras at our house. I remember going to court with my dad. He was just there, and grew up in a pretty wealthy neighborhood. I had one of my neighbors was a Chiefs player, but I was never, to my parents' credit, I was never spoiled in the normal sense of being spoiled. I was, I would get what I wanted for birthdays and Christmas, but I was spoiled in the sense that I never really had to worry about money. It wasn't like I grew up and my parents didn't have money. It was like, I played sports. I had all the opportunities that kids should have. When I was 7, my parents retired and we moved to Arizona, and we were kind of just, I was in first grade, second grade. And I just started, living a life in Arizona, and everything was pretty perfect.
So your parents had you later in life. So
Yeah. My dad was 40. My mom was 38 or 39. I'm the baby of my whole entire family.
Okay.
So my sister's like 2 years older than me. I don't think really there was anything of like significance in my childhood until my parents got divorced.
Like nothing traumatic or...
No, and it's hard to even call the divorce traumatic, but I mean, to an extent, I think that was the first big moment that's like, I can recall as a kid, my parents sitting us down and going like, hey, there's money issues and we're getting divorced. And, me and my sister freaked out, and my dad basically said, hey, I'm going to take the bar here in Arizona, and I'm going to start doing lawyer stuff again. And there was slowly just a separation of living with one parent and another parent, and I was primarily with my mom. My dad ended up moving to Phoenix. I lived in Flagstaff, and even with that, it was pretty normal. I mean, without most of my friends' parents were divorced. It wasn't like when it happened, it was a big deal. You never know it's going to happen until it does. And
so you moved to Arizona when you were 7. They got divorced when?
Probably a couple of years later.
Okay.
I think I was in 4th grade. I was probably 10. Again, I just started living life, getting really into basketball. I played basketball growing up, and it was like the main sport I played. I mean, I did other things, but it was primarily my parents never let me play football.
Yeah.
They were ahead of the game with the whole CTE thing. And at the time I was mad, but now I'm like, I have enough head trauma. I don't want to be drooling by the time I'm 40. And,
Right.
Through a life of addiction, I definitely had been put unconscious a couple times.
Right.
So I going to school, playing basketball.
Pretty normal childhood.
It couldn't have been more. I mean, I would say it was above, it was better than normal, I mean, even with them divorcing. I mean, there was a period of maybe a year where like it was clear money was tight.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know this until recently, but like electricity getting turned off, stock market crash or something happened, and I don't really know. And there was a period, and then my dad started working. It went back to, nothing was a big deal. And it wasn't until I was probably 13, my sister started getting in trouble with drugs. And it was weird because at the time it was like, I was still at that age where drugs are such a terrible thing and you shouldn't do drugs. And I was very judgmental of her. And, I remember at one point she got taken home by the cops. She was probably 16, and the next day she was gone. You know, I think she moved to my dad's house in Phoenix and got her GED, dropped out. And my sister's real smart and dropped out of high school to move down there just to get away from the scene. And
Now, what was your relationship like with your sister?
I don't think we were that close. I mean, we were close. We grew up together. I love my sister, but we were never like, you know, I've seen bonds that some siblings have, and we just never really had that. She's cool. I mean, I love her. I look up to her in a lot of ways, but we never really like, there was never a connection beyond just saying that's my sister.
So you weren't necessarily fighting all the time, but you weren't
I
necessarily...
mean, we fought. I remember punching my sister in a Target one time and crying for some reason. And
my sister would whoop me if I ever did that.
And my sister was, you know, to her credit, I don't think she ever did it, but she could have. I mean, I've seen my sister fight guys, and it's like,
Yeah.
she got into trouble later on, and she can definitely hold her own.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like around 13 or 14, my sister kind of like disappeared from everyone. I would see my dad on like weekends, and he would come up to Flagstaff and stay in a hotel one night a week. So it wasn't that I didn't ever see him. It's that I was primarily with my mom.
Right. So your dad was in Phoenix. You were in Flagstaff. Your sister started acting up. She moved out. But you still kind of maintain that relationship with your dad.
Yeah, I always wanted to live with my dad. You know, I just felt a connection to him, and, you know, it was never like I felt like he left or anything. You know, I saw him all the time. I remember a good majority of my childhood, I called my dad every night. You know, called my dad every single night. And I was always terrified because my dad drove. If you're familiar with Arizona, he would drive from every day, either Phoenix to Flagstaff, which is 2 hours, 4 hours round trip, or Phoenix to Prescott, just nearly the same, 9.5 or something. Yeah. And so he would be driving 4 hours. I was always terrified he's going to get in a car wreck, and, you know, what am I going to do about my dad? And essentially everything, it leveled out. My sister kind of like, at this point, got her stuff together to a degree. You know, she started going to school and moved out of my dad's house and kind of disappeared for a while.
And this is when she's 16, so you're roughly 14.
At this point, she might be, you know, 17. I think she moved out. You know, she's super independent. Like, she's always been more independent than me, very private. Moved out, and I'd see her for Christmases, and, you know, I'd see her for Christmas or maybe every other Christmas, and she'd be like, lost a lot of weight. And, you know, I'd be like, all right. I didn't know at the time something was going on, but my family did. I remember my grandma would be around, and my grandma was this type who, she's from a generation where like, she's constantly asking you, what do you weigh? You know? Like, yeah. And I remember at one point, she took my sister aside at one of these Christmases and said, you look great. And my mom kind of like, it's not like a good great, right? It's like a bad, you look great in a bad way. Yeah. You lost the weight with the means exactly. Weren't good. And I didn't really know anything about it. And then I remember around the time, you know, 15 or so, my friends starting, you know, smoke weed and do all that stuff. And I was very against it. And then I did it and I enjoyed it. I talked to you about this a little before, but I grew up in this generation where there was like, you know, I think we're just getting out of this, where the discussions around drugs were all related to dare, you know, and like, hey, if this is your brain on drugs, and drugs are going to destroy you, and they're so crazy and you should be scared of them. And I started smoking weed, and I'm like, what's so bad about this? Like, I didn't really understand. And I think that kind of set the stage for all of my other experimentation, you know, and it didn't happen right away, but playing basketball, everybody on the team was, you know, smoking weed and enjoying it. And it kind of gave me a sense of identity beyond the average. I think, I don't know if it's grown up with my dad, or I just like, average always felt like the slow asphyxiation. You know, it's like average is just like, I'd rather be nothing than average. Right. I started playing basketball, and as soon as I wasn't like the best on the team, which was quick, I was never really the best on the team. It was like not enough for me. You know, and I think I found some of those feelings in drugs. And there's this book in Alcoholics Anonymous called As Bill Sees It. And it's like the kind of, if you know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous, it's Bill Wilson's the founder. and wrote pretty much all the literature in it. He has this journal. I think it was a journal, but it's like a devotional you'd read every day. And he has this one that's always resonated with me, and he called it Fudge Mountain, right? And he talks about being a young kid, and it was his birthday, and he would look at this mountain. He remembers looking at the mountain, wondering, can I climb the mountain? What's at the top of the mountain? And then he says, and then my aunt distracted me with a plate of fudge. And he said, for the next 35 years, I pursued the fudge and forgot about the mountain.
Mm.
And I think a lot of that is like, essentially, I started getting these feelings that through drugs, or at least how I understand it today, that I didn't necessarily deserve yet. You know, some of those feelings I experienced today from doing the right thing, that back then I felt really good just by using a substance.
Back when you started using this substance, I know a lot of times they'll say it's like filling a void.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you were filling that void, or was it not? It wasn't that deep.
I'm sure there's truth to that. I don't think that my mom always talks. She's like, what was it that made you a drug addict? You know, was it the divorce? And I'm like, I mean, to attribute it to one thing is kind of crazy. I think to a degree, human beings are really interested in changing their consciousness. My son's too, and he'll stand in my living room and spin in circles over and over again and stop and do this.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it over and over and over again. And I think there's kind of levels to it. And I think when I found that through substances, I kind of latched onto it. And it wasn't like a quick thing. I didn't pick up smoking weed and just like automatically smoke every day. There's a progression to it. As far as a void goes, I think I found like an identity in it. I think it was almost like, it's not even that it was cool. It was something that was different than average.
So you didn't necessarily see it as good or bad. You just saw it as not average.
Yeah. I mean, there was a uniqueness to it. You know, and I've always kind of been drawn to that. My dad never worked a normal job, and he was, you know, I never saw him. And maybe there was a curiosity to it. And I've always had an issue with, you know, authority. And I don't know what it really filled, but I liked it. I mean, and it gave me something to do. Now, in hindsight, I should have been doing what I was supposed to do, you know, and I think a lot of kids who don't go down that road. I remember having friends who I grew up with who would go home and study, and they wouldn't go out with friends. And I was kind of like, you know, a square. It's like, it's boring. But my mom never ceases to remind me that one of my best friends growing up is a cardiologist now. You know, and I don't think that's the route I should have taken, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the feelings that I was supposed to adapt to as a kid, I didn't have to adapt to. Boredom, structure, you know, I kind of figured out in high school I could pass the classes without really putting in much effort. And it's not because I'm like necessarily smart or anything. It's just like I figured I do okay on the tests and turn in half the homework and you'll pass the class.
Yeah.
You know, C's get degrees. So I'll just kind of take that route. And I did. And I ended up getting into Northern Arizona University. And and by this time I had already started experimenting with other drugs. And, you know, it was a slow process, but I mean, you know, you have marijuana and these other substances. I think there was a need that they provided me something, whether it be like a social lubricant or, you know, like the ability to talk to people easier, or oftentimes like motivation. But I don't think I needed to follow that path like I thought I did. You know, again, in hindsight, it's like I should have felt my feelings and chosen to do the good thing anyway. But I mean, hindsight's 2020. It's like today I have faith in the way I feel. If I feel bad, I'm supposed to feel bad for a reason. You know, there's a quote I reference all the time, right? When life tempts you to be bitter, do not think like this is unfortunate. Instead, you should think to bear this well will bring me good fortune. And I remind myself all that time, because there's times in my being a young kid where I felt a certain way and I thought, this is bad. I shouldn't feel like this. Why me? And now today I see it as like opportunities for growth. And, you know, I feel like I'm supposed to feel what I'm supposed to feel. There's an analogy I like of like, why do eagles fly higher than other birds? I don't actually know if this is true. I don't know anything about birds, but the analogy makes sense, right? And as far as I know, from what I heard, eagles fly higher than birds because they fly into the wind. And if the analogy goes that wind is struggle and problems and feelings, I always ran away from them. And through recovery and my program today, I've learned to confront them.
Yeah.
And confronting them makes me better. And I think everybody knows this when they look back on struggles in their life. Everybody says the same thing. It's like, that sucked when I was going through it, but it made me who I am.
Yeah.
I think the program gets you to focus on where you're wrong. And I think focusing on and this doesn't even discount the fact that other people might be wrong. But if all you focus on is where other people are wrong, like, you can't do anything about it. I don't have ownership over how you act. But if I can look at you, see that you're wrong, but notice where my flaws are, I can do something about my flaws. I can take ownership of it, And I think this is what good therapy is supposed to be. Like, if you're agoraphobic, right, which is, most people think of it as the fear of outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially the fear of everything. Somebody good walking you through how to overcome this, they're not going to say, anytime you feel anxiety, go back into your bedroom. All right. They're going to say,
face it.
They're going to go to that door, touch the doorknob. All right. For the next week or month before we meet again, I want you to touch the doorknob 1,000 times a day. Then we're going to talk about you touching the doorknob. So not only do you have to experience the anxiety, then we're going to sit here next week and we're going to talk about you experiencing anxiety. So you kind of have to experience it twice. And then when you overcome that, we're going to turn the doorknob. And I think what that allows you to do is, if this is a neuron in your brain firing off, and this is anxiety, and every time you experience this, you can run away from it, then you don't have to adapt to it. And I think the best part about being a human being is we adapt to everything, literally. So you need to feel this firing off and live in a way that allows it to fire off, so all these other patterns start coming up so that you can deal with it. The feelings today that I feel would break me 15 years ago. And today they're like a 1 out of 10.
Welcome to The Good Influencers. I'm your host, Ty Manning. At my business, Restoration One of Northwest Arkansas, we restore properties damaged by water, fire, and mold. Our unique difference, though, and the inspiration for this podcast, lies with our incredible team. Most of our dedicated professionals are on paths of recovery, living out the good influence we highlight here. They bring a culture of trust and resilience to every project, ensuring that your home or business isn't just repaired, but thoughtfully restored. Choosing Restoration One means you're getting expert service from a team driven by purpose and a desire to have a positive influence. If you need compassionate restoration services, find us online at restorationoneofnwa.com or call us 24/7 at 479-866-4257. We're here to restore your property and your peace of mind. What I think is so interesting about your story, that's different than a lot of people that I've spoken with that have dealt with addiction, is a lot of people are born into it. They have parents that are addicts. They have family members that are addicts. Your story is a little bit different. It sounds like you grew up in a very, I hate the word privileged.
Yeah.
But blessed.
I was privileged 100%.
Very, very privileged life. And it almost sounds to me life was void of those headwinds like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Life was so good that you didn't necessarily learn to deal with adversity. And when adversity came, it was like,
yeah,
crap.
Yeah.
Now what do I do? You had to learn.
Yeah.
Talk me through that. Does that sound
exactly.
reasonable?
I think, if we, to talk about it in a broader way, I think by every measurable account, being a human being today is better than ever. For sure. Except for one account, and that's mental health. Not that we were measuring suicide rates 10,000 years ago.
Right.
But I would argue more people commit suicide today than ever before. And I think part of the problem is that all of our problems are solved, literally. For most people, even if you're not privileged, I work with many homeless people regularly, and I have for 11 years. Most of them are struggling with being overweight more than not eating. I don't think very many people have to worry about where they're going to sleep. I don't think many people have to worry about where they're going to get food. I think that, and there's blessings to this. Our life expectancy is higher. There's a lot of things that are good about it, but it devoids our life of, we need difficulty. It's necessary for our health. And I think that a lot of people, when they don't have any problems, the brain's job is to create problems, or is to solve problems. And if you don't have problems, it'll create problems to solve.
Yeah.
We can talk about this as we go on, but I think there's levels to problems, right? Like, I think that, if you have nothing, if I stripped you of if all you had was the clothes on your back, because if I take them from you and place you in the middle of Idaho, the first thing you're going to want is clothes.
Yeah.
Right. But let's say I put you in the middle of Idaho or Iowa or somewhere you've never been and don't know anybody. You'll want things in a particular order. Right. The first thing you'll want, this is how your brain works, is food and bed. Right. Not even a bed necessarily, just somewhere to sleep. And I would argue that if you were wanting these things and you thought to yourself, okay, if I just get food and I get a bed, I'll be good. But once you achieve those things, you want the next thing.
Exactly.
And the next thing you want is essentially this: you want to know that you're not going to die. Because plenty of people have food and they have a bed, but their dad gets drunk every night and threatens to burn the house down. Or there's gunshots going on outside their city, or whatever, and they don't feel safe. So I don't mean that in the sense of know that you're not going to die ever. I mean, I think nature's conspiring against all of us and it's going to win. But know that you're not going to die today.
Yeah.
Right. And once you achieve, and there's a lot of things that come along with that, right? It's like, I think most fears are related to the fear of death. Like if I want to be liked by my peers, it's because 99.9% of all of our ancestors, if they weren't liked by their peers, they died.
Right.
And part of the reason I want a home is because if I don't have a home, I'm more likely to die.
Right.
So, but if I get a home and then I start spending all my money gambling, I don't feel safe. And part of the reason I don't feel safe is because I'm aware, a week from now, rent's due. So achieving that second level is more than just having a house and a job. It's knowing how to manage your money and everything that comes along with it. And then once you get those figured out, you start wanting more stuff.
Right.
And I think the next thing you tend to want is people. By that, I mean friends, a tribe, romantic partners. And that's a big one. And that's a problem that even once you solve, you have to keep working on. And I think most people in recovery solve these first problems. And I think, have you ever heard of the pink cloud?
No.
So in recovery, there's this thing called the pink cloud, and it's often talked about like mysteriously, right? Like, why is it that you feel so good so early on in recovery? That's what it is, right? Oh, I'm in the pink cloud. I'm 90 days clean. I feel great.
Right. Kind of like the honeymoon stage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot. It's novelty.
Yeah.
Right. And I like to kind of demystify the pink cloud. It's pretty obvious contrast, right? You go from not having a job, your relationships being terrible, not having any money, your health is bad over on this side. And then within 90 days, you have a job, your relationships are getting better, maybe you have a place to live. And so you go from 0 out of 10 on all these sides to now you're like a 2 out of 10. You're working at the gas station, so you're a 4 out of 10 on your job. And like, these are terrible numbers, but related to these numbers are pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah.
And the way you feel is generally not just how you feel right now, but it's how you feel compared to how you just felt.
Yeah.
And a lot of people at that point feel really great. And they've solved the problems of, I have a job, I have a house, I have friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then the problems get farther and farther behind them. So a year later, their contrast is like, it's not that clear, And I think what the program does is the program gets you to go, oh, you're in a good spot. Here's a 4 step.
So when you say the program, you're talking about like the 12 steps.
12 steps. But look, I'm very, and we'll get into this in a little bit. I'm not like I worked the 12 steps for years and years. I would still consider myself somebody who works them. But there's also a lot of dogma in the 12 steps. There's a lot of, you have to be doing it this way or you're not working a program. You have to be, it's like, I think there's a lot of ways to work a program. Because I don't believe that you have a decision to either work a program or not. I think the decision is, are you going to work a conscious program or are you going to work an unconscious program? And if you don't work a conscious program, you're going to work an unconscious program. And the unconscious program is going to take you, it's a bunch of ones and zeros where the end result is you always screwing everything up.
Right.
So I work a program today. It might not be the same program I worked when I was the first 5 years of my sobriety, but I definitely work a program. Now, as the steps go, right around this time where you're 90 days clean and things are figured out, you have a 4-step, right? And a 4-step is what they call a moral inventory.
Mhm.
And I always relate this to having an inventory at a job. You're counting things. You're trying to figure out, oh, I need more of this. Oh, 75 candy bars got stolen this month or whatever. We need more candy bars. And essentially what this step from my experience is to figure out where I'm still wrong. My life might be better, but I'm still not nice to people sometimes when I should be. And I still, lack discipline in all these areas. And I'm essentially creating good problems to solve. So people feel really good because they make progress early on, and then they get to a point where progress isn't as clear and it's not obvious. If I don't have a home, it's obvious I need a home. If I don't have a job or money, it's obvious I need a job and money. If I don't have a girlfriend or husband or a wife, it's obvious I need those things.
Yeah.
Right. But once I have those things,
Now what?
what else is there?
Yeah.
And I think that happy people have a combination of two things. And we could talk about happiness, but happiness people have the absence of avoidable problems.
Okay.
We've avoided, I'm not spending all my money gambling. I'm not doing drugs. I'm not going to jail anymore. I'm not learning lessons I've learned before. I'm not a big fan of learning lessons twice anymore.
Right.
It's just not very helpful. However, that's not the only, you can't just have the absence of avoidable problems. I think, we know that wealthy people kill themselves at a far higher rate than poor people do. And I think part of the reason for that is poor people go, well, at least if I can make some money, I'd be okay. People who have money, well, I have it. What else? There's no solution to this. Mm-hmm. So I think happy people have the absence of avoidable problems. They've created the confrontation of healthy problems. So problems that I have today are I have to work out.
Mm-hmm.
I have to, right? I have to journal. I have to read, gain knowledge, and, work on my discipline, and a lot of things that bring me value today in a way that it's hard to express value to somebody who's struggled a good portion of their life to feel good. Because the pleasure that I feel today isn't the same type of pleasure that I felt when I was using and drinking.
So tell us real quick what you do now professionally. That
I worked in drug and alcohol treatment for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
So as of right now, I'm a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I really had that much interest in counseling per se. What I love to do is get in a classroom full of people and talk about how to change behavior, essentially. I mean, I don't care if I was talking to people who are struggling with their weight, I would teach the same classes that I teach in addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Food addiction and drug addiction is the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just easier to get off Big Macs than heroin. There's just truth to that. So I've been doing that for a while. As far as my story goes, I got into Northern Arizona University. I was working at my dad's law firm, and I started using, at this point, I've done every drug.
Mm-hmm.
I would still consider myself at the time experimenting, kind of just looking into changing my consciousness and kind of seeing how that felt. And I would keep up with certain things, and I ended up getting addicted to Xanax, and which is by far probably the worst drug in the world to be addicted to. It's a hidden epidemic right now. And to put a long story short, I got in some trouble, nothing major. Getting arrested for stealing stuff, and my dad bailing me out of problems, and ended up being that all of my friends in addiction in my city, essentially, and my sister too at the time, my sister continued to struggle with drugs and alcohol, and ended up being, I don't know how to say this without it sounding like, she ended up being a respected person in drug culture. So I was essentially cut off from using that drug anymore. And I started experimenting. At this point, I'm not experimenting,
You're a full-blown addict.
I'm an addict, but at the time it was weird. I was very naive. I wouldn't say I was waking up going, I feel this way because I'm addicted to drugs. I just thought it was sad.
So you're working at your dad's law firm. You're using drugs. Are you, at this point, are you functioning?
Mm-hmm.
And then, at what point it's obvious you're not functioning anymore? You said your dad bailed you out of jail. Was that the point where you're just not functioning anymore?
No, you know what's interesting? my dad bailed me out of jail. I called all my friends. At the time I was selling drugs and I had money, and it was all hidden from my dad. I would show up to work to, kind of prove to my dad that this is how I'm paying for my apartment. And my dad bailed me out of jail after none of my friends would go to my closet and get the money to bail me out. And I remember my dad bailed me out of jail, and I walked out of jail and I went to give him a hug. And from the deepest part of my soul, the only thing I said was, "I'm not you." And I cried. And it was like I let my dad down. And I think it was kind of insight into this, I think my dad cast a shadow, that I felt that I had to live up to.
How did your dad react when you said that?
I don't entirely remember because I was under the influence.
Fair enough.
He didn't say anything. He took me home and I went to my closet and I took more Xanax. I didn't like the way I felt. To me, the mistake was stealing stuff from Walmart, alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
My dad wasn't very good at confrontation. It's like, okay, solve this problem, sweep under the rug, let's watch Law and Order.
That's interesting as an attorney.
Maybe that's why my dad really always wanted to get along with me. And I think that it's in the end kind of what saved me. I listened to you talk to Tommy and there's a lot of value in tough love. My dad did not have tough love.
Mm-hmm.
And I had such a good relationship with him that I don't think that would have worked.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, a lot of my motivation came from wanting to make my dad proud. So yeah, he took me home. I don't think it was really talked about at all. I think it was like, oh, you stole some stuff, kids. Everyone will steal some stuff, no get in trouble for it.
How old are you at this point?
17, 18. I moved into the dorms at NAU. And I didn't need to. My mom lived in Flag, so I didn't need to move into the dorms. And I moved into the dorms for the college experience, but I also moved into the dorms because I knew people from all over the country were going to move into the dorms and they would want drugs, and
business decision.
I wouldn't give an 18, 17-year-old Dylan that much credit, but yeah, and it worked out for a while. And I get home that night and, I keep doing what I'm doing. And eventually later on is when I kind of got cut off from the substance and I started using opiates. And at the time, it's the middle of the opiate epidemic. And I mean, so many pills were prescribed throughout the country that it was never hard to get any of them. And, there were anybody who breaks their leg playing football or sprains their ankle or gets their wisdom tooth pulled, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I didn't like them at first. They made me sick. And long story short, it ended up, a lot of these addicts you end up talking to, it just ends up not making sense to keep using these pills. The only other thing to do at that point is heroin. And I think this is when I start realizing, okay, I'm waking up sick. I'm definitely an addict. I'm functioning to a degree. I have some money, but it was clear to me, okay, you got a drug problem. But, it's funny thinking back on it, the thought of quitting never, I would think okay, this is the last time I'm doing it. But the thought of actually going to rehab or that was never even in my, and it was because I never talked to anybody or nobody around me ever got clean. Now, looking back or experience, a lot of my friends remarkably have got clean. But at the time, at that point, I'm functioning to the point where I can get enough to do my daily activities. Not really maybe I'm getting high occasionally, but I'm using so I can go to work. I'm using so I can go to school.
Using so you can?
Yeah.
So, because if you're not using, you're sick at home?
I'm not going to school. Yeah.
Interesting.
There's no way. I mean, if it weren't for my dad, I would have finished college, which is a weird thing to say. But my dad interrupted my lifestyle. I had an experience at one point where I was living with a friend at the dorm. Not at the dorms, on campus. I had quit selling drugs, lived in this place for free. And, just because certain things happened to where I could live in this place for free. I gave this guy a phone number and he ended up selling all the drugs and said, you can live here. So I lived there and I kept going to school, and he left town at one point. He said, okay, this weekend, answer the phone. I'm like, all right, I can answer the phone. And keep in mind, I'm not selling heroin. I'm just selling weed. It's nothing crazy. It's and I opened his safe one day and there's a bottle of Xanax, and I probably haven't done Xanax in 6 months or a year. And that's the last thing I remember. Pretty soon after that, he comes home and I don't know what happened, but he talks to the neighbors and he says, Dylan, you're walking around the apartment complex with a shotgun and you're throwing money out the window. And he's like, you got to go. Wow. And so I left and I was in my car and I'm just like, what do I do? And again, it wasn't like, you're a drug addict, Dylan. It was like, I made some mistakes. Shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. Like, next time I'll not invite these people over and just be smarter. And I ended up moving into my mom's house that she was selling because she had moved out to Arkansas. And I lived there for a while, and my sister and I got a place together. And at this point, my sister had gotten her stuff together. My dad ended up taking her, interrupting her life, putting her in his house and saying, "You're going to live here until you're clean." And my sister got clean, and she moved back up to Flagstaff and went into the engineering program at Northern Arizona University. And we lived together after that. I got out of selling drugs and I got out of this crazy lifestyle. I mean, my lifestyle was still crazy, but I wasn't running around doing things. I was waking up, getting heroin, going to school, showing up at work.
You're a responsible addict.
I mean, responsible is
in your mind.
In my mind, the only responsibility I really had was school. I had it set up. My dad essentially said, "Hey, clock in." My dad's law firm was right on campus, right off campus, right on the edge. He said, "Clock in, answer the phone, deposit these checks. When you got class, go to class, stay clocked in." And I had a plan at the time. I was going to finish school, take my LSATs, and then work for my dad's law firm. And eventually, at one point, my dad shows up at my house, and he basically took me and he said, "Look, I know you're getting high. I know what you're doing. You're going to come down to Phoenix." And that was like the beginning of the end. This was probably 2010 or 2011. I think I was a junior, almost a senior in college. He took me to Phoenix. The crazy thing is it still was never like, how about just get clean? It was always like, do these things to satisfy my dad, and he takes me down there. I end up being down there for 2 years, and at first, the way my dad's house was set up, it was like, okay, you're 2 hours away from home. You're just going to live here. When we go to work, you're going to go to work. When I go to the grocery store, you can go to the grocery store. I'm just going to make sure like you don't use drugs. And of course I still use drugs, and I figured out how to get it in Phoenix. And there was a time where my dad would sleep next to me in bed. And it was the only time he didn't watch me. But he would wake up in the middle of the night and he would reach over and push just to see if I'm there. And what I would do is I would wait till he's asleep, and I would get a sweatshirt and I would fill it up with towels and pillows, and I would fill the bed up with pillows to make it look like I'm laying there. And I would fill my sleeve up with towels, and then I would make it look like I'm laying in the bed. And at the end of the sweatshirt, I would put the remote control. So he would wake up and look over, and it just looks like I'm sleeping. The hugs area. I would leave his house and drive all the way to Flagstaff, and then drive all the way back home and sneak into the house and lay down, and he would wake up and I'd go, "Oh, and pretend like nothing happened." The wild thing about this is my stepmom fostered dogs. So she had like 60 dogs. So sneaking out of a house was one thing. I used to sneak out of this tiny little window in the shower, jump in the backyard. My stepmom's the type of person who, if she goes to the pound, then they're like, "This pit bull just murdered a family, we're going to euthanize it." She would go, "No, you're not." And she would take it. So I would jump into the backyard, scan the backyard real quick, run to the fence, go all the way around, get in my dad's car, and drive. And at one point, he got some alert that his card had been used about halfway. You know where Cordis Junction is? Yeah, right at Cordis Junction, his card got used, and he sat me down and drug tested me and knew I was using. And my dad always slept with a 44 Magnum on his nightstand. Wow. And one of these moments that kind of recalibrates my perspective on life happened, and I think about it all the time. He sat me down, and I'm sitting there, and he goes, "Dylan, if I could put that gun in my mouth and pull the trigger and guarantee you a good life, I would do it without thinking." Of course, I'm like, cry and get emotional. I love my dad, and get high that night. And I would talk to my dad a lot. I was very open I wouldn't tell him what I was doing. I would hide a lot of things from him. But when we had these conversations on these drives, we would wake up in Phoenix and drive 2 hours home, and my dad smoked cigarettes his whole life. And I'm like, you got to understand, if one day they make cigarettes illegal, and if you don't have cigarettes, you get ridiculously sick, would you call your friend for some cigarettes? He'd go, "Yeah, I would." And so he understood to a degree. And back to this point of my parents not struggling, I do think that in certain environments, both my parents would have been addicts. My dad had an obsessive nature about him. My dad is he's very almost like Howard Hughesy. I mean, he's like almost a savant autistic. Like there were many things he was just ridiculous. We would watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Every question right, no lifelines. But
I mean, it sounds like he was carrying around a lot of pain.
For sure, especially with his kids struggling the way we struggled. But there was just things he wouldn't like take care of himself. He was so smart in these areas and disregarded these areas completely. And I think that obsessive nature, I mean, he'd wake up at 3:00 in the morning and look at the Chinese stock market and stuff. Like, it was just like, and he didn't need money. And I think in certain environments, like, he would have fallen, victim to that. I mean, like, there's a lot of talk about genetics and predisposition, and we don't understand genetics. We understand more than we used to.
So I guess you kind of think you've got this addictive gene from your dad, even though he wasn't like an outward addict. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
My dad and my mom. My mom, there's family members who struggle with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as if you have these genes when you're an addict or you're not an addict.
Mm-hmm.
And certain genes turn on dependent on your environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the whole field of epigenetics is about that. It's just an interesting thing. I think in a different world, I think what makes me an addict can serve me in a lot of ways. I'm glad the route that I went down. I'm glad that it led to what it led to, because I don't think I would have been happy being a lawyer. My value at that point was like, lawyers make money, and that's it. Like, am I particularly interested in law? Not beyond me having the capacity to kind of tell off authority.
Right, yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily that valuable.
So at what point did your mind change? Because you kind of referenced a couple times where you never thought you were an addict. You never considered like going to therapy or recovery or detox or.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened in your life to kind of get you to that point where you're like, something got to change?
So there's a couple points. Eventually what happened is that I got in some trouble in Arizona. It was trouble that I had given my dad's debit card to a dealer. I got to the point where I didn't need to go to Flagstaff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I could put money outside and it would show up. And by this point, I was not allowed on cell phones. I was not allowed on computers. I was not allowed, like my dad. If you would have walked up to my house in Phoenix, you would have gotten to the house and realized there's a deadbolt on the outside of the door. So you can just open it and walk in. My dad locked me in the house. So I had given my debit card to a guy, my dad's debit card to a guy. And I rationalized this in my mind, right? I'm like, I'm working for my dad. He's keeping my checks. He can spend the money. Anyway, long story short, my dad gets a call. His card is getting used at Cabela's to buy a bunch of ammunition.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, well, the dude didn't follow the rules that I gave him. Right? Of like, don't be suspicious and don't go to ATMs and do all this stuff. And so right about this time, the cops call and I go, can I go out to Arkansas? I want to go see mom. And it wasn't a decision of I'm going to get clean. The decision was I'm going to run away from this feeling.
Mm.
And this trouble I'm about to encounter.
Yeah. Get me away.
Yeah. And so I end up out in Arkansas and I bring heroin with me. I use heroin on the plane. I use heroin on my layover. I get to my mom's house, I use heroin there, and she catches me.
How does she catch you?
Motherly instincts. I was in the bathroom too long. She didn't ever really find anything. It was just, she just knew. At that point, the gig was kind of up. I was in Arkansas, and you could have listed all 50 states and said, where do you not want to go? I'm like, Arkansas is one of them, And she goes, you're going to go to treatment. I can't really do anything, I'm like, it wasn't as if I go, I'm going to go to treatment. This is like the best thing for me. I didn't want to. It was going to be, at that point in time, it was one of the worst things that ever happened to me.
Going to treatment was?
Yeah, it was just, I'm starting over my life and not going to go back to school, not going to do nothing. Everything's over. Now it's clear to everybody, you're a drug addict, you're addicted to heroin.
So, but at this point, you still didn't really have that change of heart, right? Because mom sent you to treatment, but at some point, I mean, in order for treatment to actually work, you have to.
I think the process started happening, because once I'm in treatment, I'm starting to be around people who've been clean. I met one of the first people I met in Arkansas is a guy I still work with today.
Mm-hmm.
sick, but I'm sick. I'm miserably sick. Back physically, I mean, it's hard to even explain. Anybody listening to this, they know.
Yeah.
Who's been there. And I was at what's called observational detox. Today they have medical detox. At the time, certain medications were kind of frowned upon. And so I sat there and ended up getting transferred to a residential program within the same facility. And I don't think I really talked for 2 weeks, beyond like, Dylan, I didn't want to make friends. I didn't, I was kind of just doing it to do it. And yeah, I started thinking like, okay, now I'm off of the substance. Right. And for a long time, it was always like, if I can just get off of it, I'll be okay. But it kind of discounts all the times I got off of it. There was many times I got off heroin. I would just be using other drugs and I would always go back to heroin. I'm in treatment and I'm sitting in a meeting one day that's brought to the center by just volunteers in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous did the same thing. And I'm sitting there and for some reason I'm listening to these guys tell their story and I didn't want to get high. And it was this powerful moment of like, cause I didn't believe in God, which is a common struggle with people early in recovery. So pick the higher power. And I realized for me, I was like, for the first time, I've never been able to think or talk or act in a way to where I don't want to get high. So these 4 guys come up here and talk about their life, their experiences, overcoming struggles. And for the first time, I don't want to get high. And I'm like, I'm just going to kind of like hang out with these guys.
So that was the point, like where you were, your mind was.
Yeah. I mean, it was hope. It was like, okay, these guys have kind of been through what I've been through and they're on the other side. They got jobs and spouses and all this. So I'm like, if talking to them makes me not want to use, like maybe, and again, looking back, I didn't understand where my desires came from. I don't think we understand where desires come from today, really, but I know that a lot of desire is what they call mimetic, and it comes from the people around you. You tend to desire what the people around you desire. And so I started desiring sobriety. I started doing the thing, right? Meetings every day. I got out of treatment. I would wake up and I would wait until a meeting at noon. And then after the meeting, I would wait until a meeting at 7 because for some reason in that meeting, I didn't want to use, there was a structure to it and there was a process to it. And every month I got a coin and it was like a validation to it. And I think the next big wake up call for me was years later. And it's not to say I wasn't working a program of recovery, but nobody gets sober to be sober. It's not like I was like, I want to get clean. Like never changing the way I feel sounds great. That's like this. The reason we want to be sober is to achieve the things we can't achieve when we're drinking or using. So I can climb the mountain that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I've been so distracted by all this fudge that like, I forgot that like the way to actually get good feelings is not by pursuing good feelings. It's like hedonistic. I'm like, life is not about the pursuit of pleasure because the problem is time exists, right? So if I pursue pleasure right now, how am I going to feel later? How am I going to feel tomorrow? There's a lot of things I can go do for pleasure, but how am I going to feel tomorrow? How's my wife going to feel? How's, my son going to feel? I didn't realize that until I was clean a few years. And it wasn't that I wasn't working a program. It was the only purpose of working a program was to be clean. So I think I woke up, I ended up meeting my wife and, started working in treatment and struggling, obviously, still, I still wanted to use, I still wanted to drink, but it was just very, the whole discussion around choice is like it's a complicated thing, right? I think Tommy hit it on the head when he talked about being over an alligators and, you have a choice to let go.
Yeah.
I think there's truth to that in active dependence. But if I get high today, it's a choice. Like I'm choosing it. Now, if I'm actively addicted and actively dependent, I'm not to say that, and this isn't to say that there's no addict who hasn't chosen at that point not to use. Those people exist. It's just it's not one or the other. But today, once you've been clean for a while, you can't use that excuse. You can't say, well, it's a disease. I don't have a choice because you do. And having that mindset gives away your power. And for good reason, will is almost demonized in recovery, right? You can't rely on your own will,
right?
But it doesn't mean it should be discounted entirely. And there's this part of your brain called I'm probably going to get this wrong because I got it from somebody far smarter than me. It's called the mid-anterior cingulate cortex. And they call it the seat of the will. And it grows when you do things that you don't want to do. And it shrinks when you do things you want to do, right? It's very strong in people, athletes who choose to work out every day. It's very weak in people who have issues with substances. It grows. It's very big in people who live long. They're actually starting to think it's the seat of the will to live.
So you're saying the very act of learning to do things you don't want to do will increase your longevity?
Yes, in a sense, right?
Interesting.
Because, I mean, people do give up the will to live. We know this as far as people die quicker after they retire. They die quicker when their spouse dies. People who, it becomes difficult to really do things that are difficult. And you can either choose not to do them, and then you get the consequences, which normally is your health worsens and a lot of things happen that aren't necessarily conducive to you living longer, but not even in the sense of like longevity. I'm just saying that the principles of failure are like rarely prejudiced. Like I've met so many people who have relationship issues or money issues or career issues, and their failures in those areas aren't specific to relationships, money, or their job. They give up. Part of the reason they give up is because that part of their brain, they haven't been working on it. I ask people all the time, if you could have one thing, what would it be? And you know what the number one answer is?
No.
Knowledge. And I get it, especially if they're saying like, I want the knowledge of, the Powerball number.
This is addicts that you're talking about, you're asking?
Normally, it's pretty much the only people I talk to. So I understand the answer, and I think there's some truth to that. But the problem is they have knowledge and they're not living according to it.
Interesting.
Aren't there things that you should do that you don't do?
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, like Socrates has a great quote. He said, who knows if he actually said this, but he said, the truly free individual exists only to the extent of his own self-mastery. Those who do not govern themselves are condemned to find masters to govern over them. You're free to do anything, but if you don't have the ability to do things that are difficult, how are you free to work out when you know working out is good for you? How are you free to save money when you want to buy stuff? How are you free to, you need to actually work on building discipline.
Now, do you think this goes back to your childhood a little bit, to where you weren't forced to do difficult things?
In a sense, I was, in different ways. I think there's a connection to this in kids who play sports, right? Kids who play sports are usually more likely to be successful. And, if I signed up for a sport, I was forced to do it. My dad said, you signed up for this. You got to do it. And I think that helped a lot. I had a client recently. We were doing a class and we were interviewing other people in the class. And I leave my office and he's sitting out of class, which isn't allowed. What are you doing out of class? And he goes, how is interviewing a person going to help me stay sober? Mechanistically, probably not at all. But I guarantee you that doing things you don't want to do is going to make you better at not doing things you want to do. And there's really no argument for that. Then one of the number one things I got from being in treatment and going to meetings was having a feeling and not acting according to it. Because if I just act according to every feeling I have, if I'm tired, I'm going to sleep. If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat.
Yeah.
I'm not choosing who I should be based on you need to choose who you want to be first and make decisions based on who you want to be, not based on how you feel. Right. And so I get to this point in my recovery where I'm doing the whole thing for the program, but I'm 300 pounds. I got to treatment at 150 pounds. And 2 years out of treatment, I'm 300 pounds. And I'm laying in bed, next to my wife, is she even attracted to me? I didn't get clean and sober to just be unhealthy. And I started figuring out, I'm missing this. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing, and I started pursuing, fitness. And I started, which is something that I've had a history of even in my addiction pursuing, and I got good feelings from. And so I started doing all these things, and I finally admitted I'm an addict. It's weird to me that my whole life as an addict, I never admitted I was an addict, and I always stayed an addict. And as soon as I admit I'm an addict, I was able to overcome being an addict.
Do you know what I think is interesting is I believe every human being is an addict.
Oh, me too.
To some degree.
Yeah.
Well, and because we're flawed. That's why the principles of NA and AA, the 12 steps, I think are so powerful, because they're they're principles that every person should live by. And that's why, to some degree, I feel, even though I'm not an addict and in a substance abuse sense, I kind of feel a kinship in a way to addicts.
Yeah.
Because I try to live my life in a way where I'm constantly, I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to overcome the things in my life that are keeping me down.
Yeah.
And it's powerful to hear the stories of addicts.
Yeah.
And to see how people recover, because drug addiction is brutally hard from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't experienced it myself. I know a lot of people that have experienced it, and it's brutally hard, and it's a life commitment. It's a lifestyle commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been inspired to see people that overcome addiction and what it takes. People that are clean for 20 years that still attend meetings 3 and 4 times a week.
Yeah.
You can make the argument, oh, no, I'm good. I've been clean for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's, that's
Well,
where it's going to get you.
It's the whole, they say all the time, the newcomer's the most important person in the room. And it's not because they're more important than me. It's because I need to know what it's like, because my brain forgets. If I'm not deliberately experiencing someone talking about the consequences of addiction, my brain starts remembering it was pretty nice.
So you end up relying on each other then.
Yeah. I asked everybody, anybody that comes in treatment, I'll stop an entire class. I'll go, how is it out there? What do you mean? Am I getting high and drinking? Like, is it good? I haven't been in the game a while.
Has it changed?
And they go, no, it's terrible. And I go, okay, cool. And I'm in the right spot.
Gotcha.
But the idea of taking being an addict on myself, I got very interested, through working a program. I went to Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous both for about a year when I first got clean. And I ended up pretty much just going to AA. And you'll find in these programs, there's really not a difference. I mean, some people will say like, oh, AA is for alcoholics. I can tell you, you walk into one of those rooms, they're all addicts and they'll all admit to drug use. And it's just the the way they talk, they tend to not want to talk about drugs or mention them. So whenever I'm in those meetings, I talk about alcohol, but it's alcohol is drugs is alcohol is, Yeah. And I just found that there's a lot of people in there who were a lot older than me and 40 years of sobriety. And I attached myself to them and I got really involved in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started learning about it. And I remember sitting down with my sponsor early on and, he says, read this chapter. I sat down, I read the chapter and he goes, okay, let's talk about it. And I go, well, I read the chapter, but I don't really remember. I can't really retain information. I can't focus. And he goes, read it again. I'm like, all right. And I read it again. And maybe I get a little bit more information and I tell him about it. And he goes, read it again. He goes, you know what? Write it down. And I go, that's like 30 pages. And I go, can I type it? He goes, you can't type it. He goes, I know you. You're going to go find it online and copy it and change the font. And I'm like, yeah, but I type really fast, way faster than I write. He goes, you're not typing it. Even if you don't copy stuff, you're not typing it. You're going to write it. Mm-hmm. And I wrote it down. And that next time I went to him, I knew a lot about that chapter. He said, it looks like you can retain information. And he said, I'm not a fan of you arguing for your limitations. He said, if you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them. Mm. And we've been in this society where we've been told for so long there's something wrong with your brain. And this medication fixes it. And it's not to say that there aren't some things wrong with people's brain. I'm not trying to be the anti-medication guy. Yeah. Right? But people have different degrees of focusing. And part of the reason we've been told this is to sell people pharmaceuticals. And I'll tell you 100% right now, I focus way better than I ever focused before. And I don't take any substances at all. But I practice focusing. And you do this through a lot of ways. You do it through, meditation. You can do it through prayer. You can do it through reading. You can do it through writing. You can do it through sitting in a meeting. And every time you want to get up, you don't. You sit there and you try to focus again. And I got pretty good at focusing. And through learning that big book, I got interested in reading and I got interested in philosophy and I got interested in theology. And to bring the point home, I ended up getting interested in Buddhism and Christianity and all sorts of different religions. And I was kind of obsessed with, a lot of, especially in the Bible, ideas I could find the psychological significance behind. Mm-hmm. because I had a really hard time just like, taking stories literally. I wanted to understand, okay, what's the psychological significance of Noah's Ark? I'm like, oh, okay. God tells you to do things. If you don't do things, when the storm comes, you're going to drown. I'm like, that's pretty, I can get that, and I'm reminded of that every day. I always struggled with atonement, and I'm not trying to make this into anything, but I didn't understand, like, what does it mean to take the sins of the world onto yourself? And it wasn't until I listened to somebody and he said, look, biblically Christ is an ideal and we should strive to act like him. And he took the sins of the world onto himself. And in that we're all forgiven. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he goes, he says, look, I spent years of my life saying, I'm not an addict. They're addicts, right? I'm not like that. And through that, I just kept being an addict. And it wasn't until I took that sin on myself that I was able to deal with it. And I think a lot of people grow up their whole lives and they go, well, I will never become like mom or dad. And then they become like mom and dad. Yeah. You don't recognize your capacity to be these things. If you don't recognize that capacity, you can't protect yourself against it. And I think there's a balance between like doing this in a way that affects your self-esteem and being hard on yourself and the truth. And I'll tell you the truth today is like, I have the capacity to not be a good person. And if I'm not paying attention, I won't be a good person. I have the capacity to destroy my life, whether drugs and alcohol are in them or not. I have the capacity to ruin my relationships. And I wake up every day and I remind myself of this, that whatever's going on is my fault, or at least my responsibility to fix. And I can't put it on anybody else, because as soon as I put it on somebody else, I'm just distracting myself from the fact that I can be better. And so I started like learning about things that brought me value. And I realized, back to the very first thing we were talking about, once you have a home and a job and friends, a lot of addicts get stuck between this third and fourth layer, right? If you have a home, a job, friends, a spouse, it's not as if you're going to achieve those things and just be happy. I think the next thing that you need to do is do something that's valuable to yourself and other people. And you could call these hobbies or interests or anything. But the problem is you're not going to do these things and then feel good immediately. I don't sit down and read a book and go, it feels good. There's certain interests and there's certain things that are valuable to me that I never knew were valuable until I kind of pursued them. We can't learn what we think we already know. And I think a lot of addicts and alcoholics and normal people think that they know themselves. And I think the first step in understanding who you are is recognizing you have no idea who you are. There's something cool in that, because not only do you get to know who you are, you get to know who you could be. Through doing this, I've learned that I'm so interested in philosophy, and I'm so interested in behavior change and theology, and I'm so interested in talking to people who are struggling about it, that I don't care about the normal things. Like things, I promise you, things don't bother me today. And it's an odd, I don't even know exactly how I got here, but I put all of my energy into certain things. I don't have any energy for the other things. I think in time, if you want to get to a position where things don't bother you, you don't walk around acting like you don't care. Things not bothering you isn't indifference. It's not going, well, nothing bothers me, right? It's about being very specific about what bothers me.
Yeah, being very deliberate how you live your life. And
here's why I don't care what people think of me, is because I put all of my energy into what my wife thinks of me and what my son thinks of me and what my dad thinks of me. And I don't have energy to care what other people think. And when I was in my addiction, I didn't give that energy appropriately. So I would go into a gas station and I would care about what that random dude was thinking about me. When you don't have things that you put your energy into, everything matters. When you don't have real clear values, your values become feeling good.
Yeah, there's a quote I like. People that don't stand for something fall for anything. You've got to have something that you have to have a conviction.
Yeah.
Whatever that conviction is, you have to have it, and you have to go at it. You have to be all in.
Yeah. I mean, look, you have a finite amount of mental energy. And I truly believe that what you focus on, you're going to feel, right? Like, I'm hungry right now. If I start thinking about Taco Bell, my mouth will water. Taco Bell's nowhere near me.
Yeah.
Right. But just based on a thought alone, I get a biological reaction.
I've got some hot sauce packets in the other room.
Yeah. I'm probably actually going to go get Taco Bell after this. But like, there's another great quote by a guy named Eric Hoffer, and he says, man minds his business when his business is worth minding. And when his business isn't worth minding, he minds other people. And my business today is worth minding. I work with 30 to 60 people every single month who generally, when they come into meeting me, don't like me. If I cared, it would really affect the way I did my job. But I don't. I'm too focused on what truly matters to me, and that's doing a good job. And the idea of like feeling good today isn't part of it. My life's pursuit today is being good, not feeling good. I think as kids, right? As kids, we go pleasure. And I think as adolescents, we go principles lead to pleasure, right? And I think as an adult, not somebody who's over 18, but a morally healthy adult, you're just focused on the principle. And it's not that through the principle you won't experience pleasure. My pleasure today is different. It's not a feeling good necessarily. It's a knowing good, if that makes any sense at all.
Knowing good and doing good. And
yeah, knowing I'm doing good
right.
is what I need. And that's what the pleasure is. But
well, and that's why this podcast is called The Good Influencers, because that's what we're trying to uncover. And the message that I want people to hear, is do good, be good, find your niche, and do it well.
Yeah.
And I want to close on one final question.
Yeah.
You mentioned you have a 2-year-old son.
Mm-hmm.
Through your experiences growing up with your parents, through addiction, through recovery, through working with people in recovery, through learning these lessons that you've learned, how is that going to influence the way that you raise your son?
I'll tell you, my dad, as amazing as he was, one thing that I struggle with my dad and how he raised me is like, he never sat me down and said, Dylan, life is really hard. Things came so easy to him that it was almost just you gotta go to work, you do this, you do that. And he was probably too lenient. I'll hopefully achieve a little bit more of a balance between leniency and being strict. And what I'm going to impart to my son is growing up and watching me. Jung says that children are educated by what the adult is, not by what the adult says. So I'm going to be the absolute best I can be, because I'm very aware of what I'm going to regret when I die. And it's none of these little things. I'm going to regret spending time with my kid. I'm going to regret caring about all the mundane nonsense in the world. I think I'm going to be the absolute best person I can be, and then let my son know this isn't easy. And hopefully he sees me struggle through it, because there's many days I wake up and I don't want to do what I'm supposed to do. And maybe he sees me struggle through it. I work out with my son, and I have a little gym in my house, and he's in there with me every day. And he's always, if I'm working out in there, he's in there with me. Mm-hmm. And he sees me doing difficult things. I'm going to be a model. I don't think there's anything, and keeping in mind the reality of I'm not going to do it perfectly. There's a good chance with me and his mother struggling with addiction that he's going to struggle with addiction. It's about a 50-50 chance. If you have a parent, you'll struggle with it. So I think that, the best thing I can do is stay clean and sober, so that he at least believes that he can. I think that a lot of people struggle with their why. Nietzsche said that he who has a why can bear any how. It's not about how to not drink or use drugs. It's about why you're not drinking and using drugs. Mm-hmm. And if all I get from sobriety and being clean is him knowing that he can if he ever struggles, that's enough. But I mean, literally everybody can get clean and sober. It's just, it's an endeavor that you have to take, and it's an endeavor that you have to have faith in and believe that it's going to work out. And it will. I think a lot of people just have too much faith in drugs and alcohol because it produces a result quickly.
And we're all addicts.
Yep.
All right, Dylan.
Appreciate you. That's fun.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for listening. We hope you were inspired by the story of today's good influencer. If so, please consider sharing it. Also, if you know someone doing good in our community whose story needs to be heard, send them my way. You can email me at thegoodinfluencerspodcast@gmail.com.